CRAWLERS is an anonymous bot collective that secretly works on the internet to scrape data, to crawl user pages, to steal information and images, and then to create an alternate social network of warped truth and altered facts. The bots in the collective of crawlers work on social networks, namely on Facebook, and act as human beings. So they have profiles and they are posting things, they are commenting things, they are sharing things, and they are interacting with other human profiles. While they are doing that, they are scraping all informations, all user data and all images from the befriended accounts, which normally would not be accessible if they were not befriended. Like this, they collect and scrape all the data that they can find in order to create a second social network with a slightly altered content. All the data that is being collected, that is being saved, is in the same process altered and slightly changed. So every information that was found on the original profiles now is a bit off. It's always close to being real, but it never really is real. So the resulting data is not being saved exactly like it had been found, but it's like a kind of a parallel universe where everything is a little bit different. The same thing happens with the images. So when this data is being first scraped and then transformed, in the next and last step, out of this data, a second social network is being created, which can be found through the CRAWLERS website. Once that is done, every human profile that is being befriended by the bots then gets an invitation link to visit their profile on the alternate social network. The whole process happens without the knowledge of the human users of the original social network. So they are befriending a person, not knowing that it is a bot, and they are not aware of this process up to the point where they get the invitation link to check out their newly created profile. This process happens on and on, so the group of bots keeps working all the time around the clock, and they are trying to find new friends, trying to get more data, and constantly build this alternate social network. So obviously it is a surprise for the users when they get the link to their alternate profile, and we have created it in a way that it is very clear that this profile is about you, even though everything is changed. So there are a lot of the information that can be found there is not 100% traceable. Every name is slightly altered, every information is just a little bit off, but it is very clear that this process is about you or the person in question. So what happens is it is definitely very irritating and maybe for some also a frightening insight that all this data that they are using on their private accounts is now available in another context and is being published in this way. So one of the most obvious goals of this project is to make people more sensitive towards how easily all the data can be accessed and how it can be distributed. So it is mostly, or to a bigger degree, about the security of personal data on the web. But it is also about how different realities, different truths can be created. So the idea here really is not to just show that this is possible, but to also show kind of a different version of yourself, or a different version that somebody else created out of you, or maybe a version how somebody else looks at you. So it's not just the exposition of what it is, but it's also the framing or the slight transformation of that, which might make you consider a bit also how you present yourself, or what is relevant about the characteristics or the things that you say, or the images that you share, or the way that you look at yourself. So it's not just a technical demonstration of what is possible, even though that is the case. It's also it plays with an artificial world, so to say, where, let's say, slightly different rules apply. And it's one thing in my work in general like is the comparison between different perspectives. And here in this case you have let's say an alternate profile page of yourself, which is almost the same to a certain degree, but like on the first look it almost looks the same, but it's all those subtle or sometimes not so subtle differences which gives you the possibility to compare the way you normally would present yourself or see yourself and a different version of yourself, so to say. And for this project we have used different forms of, well, algorithms, automations, and deep learning. It basically falls into several steps. The first one is the development of the bots, so of the automated profile actions, which is becoming more and more difficult, but still is possible. So here we basically automated browser interaction in order to simulate to the social network that a human person would be sitting at a browser, clicking on things, scrolling, and things like this. So we're kind of emulating human behavior as good as possible on an array of different laptops that are standing in a server room. So all of them are switching through different accounts, then doing human-like actions. So that's the first part of our development. The second part is the transformation of the material, namely the text and the images that we're scraping. And here we've used deep learning methods in order to, where for one, on the text base, we had trained models that were trained on big data sets of text, which could, when you give it an input text, then kind of try to find something that is close to it, but not being exactly the same. And this is especially helpful if you want to look at the bigger context of a text and also see what happened before in the text, what happened afterwards in the text. And that is the first way of how we used AI in this context. And we've been trying to go back and forwards to do something that feels fairly real, but there's also still pretty much an amount of this kind of uncanny valley feel to it. So some of it also always feels slightly wrong in a way. And for the images, we tried a similar approach. We did two things. One is a reverse search, in which we try to find images based on what we find on the user profiles, to find images that are almost the same, but with a bit, but it's a different image, so to say. So let's say if you would have an image of me sitting here on a chair with books in the background, with a colorful jacket, then we would try to find an image that is of a similar person who almost looks like me. So that is the one way of how we tried to create this this seemingly almost identical but not quite depiction of the original profile. And the other thing is that we've been working with style transfers in order to also transform the look and the way the image is shaped. So the first one is kind of altering the content, and the second one is then altering the appearance of it. So we've then been scraping big databases of input images and then impose the aesthetics or the looks of those onto the images in our database. So we've got two different steps of transformation of the image data. And then we bring everything together, create those profile pages, and we tried to copy the original social network site almost 100%. And afterwards we added a few glitches or small alterations, so that you're not just looking at the content, but also at how the things are being presented, that everything is always a bit off or moving to the side. So just to underline these aspects of this kind of uncanny, somehow off presentation. So why does this interest me? Or how does it maybe also fall into the other things that I'm doing? Majorly, I'm also doing installations, or I'm doing staged pieces. And one thing that in general interests me is, like I already mentioned a bit before, the comparison between different perspectives, or the switching between different settings, or switching between different worlds. So often what I'm interested in is using technology to look at something that is analog, or that is supposedly real, or that is happening in the actual personal everyday life, and then use technology to kind of impose a different look on it. Or use an artwork to impose a different look on how technology is being used in those contexts. So what I'm often after in those pieces is to establish a setting, propose it as something that is then accepted as something that's real, or that's kind of the analog starting point, and then switching that setting, and by that, for one, reflecting of what you saw before, and then questioning the logics of that, and through the alteration also put the digital transformation in the center point, and make hopefully make you think about this. So in this sense, even though this piece is fairly different, as it's only well, there are no performers, there's no staging and things like this, so it in a way falls a bit out of what I normally do, but with respect to the themes or topics that are included, it also fits very well. And in a kind of post-digital perspective, I also see this piece in a way to question how digitality nowadays influences society and our daily life. And in this specific case, it is about the, for one, the security of data and the accessibility of personal data. And on the other hand, it's how easily truth can be manipulated and how identities can be warped and changed and so on and so forth. We have been developing this project since, I think, 1.5 years by now. And one side project that came out of it, which kind of just used all the musical and artistic aspects, was the project Avery, which would just create music and write poems and so on. While now this project CRAWLERS is focusing more on the social, political, and technical aspects and implications of this technology. And this project has been developed in the remote residency of the ZKM, and will be part of the Intelligent Museum, also as in a cooperation with the Deutsche Museum. And what is important to mention is that this has been a team effort of several programmers and people who collaborated on this project, which is namely Steffen Luray for the bot programming, Konrad Kanzlin for the transformation of the data, and Yeray Suarez for the front-end programming. So we are right now using different servers which are standing in different locations, and each of those do their specific functions, and now we're trying to bring everything together. And yeah, also we're spreading out the bots over several machines, so when the first ones will be blocked, that we have other machines that are still running.